The Newsagents.
We're going to play you two clips. One is from a parody account, a comedian. The other is a serving government minister. You've got to identify which is which.
You say it was wrong. Was it racist?
Well, it was wrong. It was wrong. And I'm not afraid to come out and say it was wrong. And for me, saying something is wrong is very strong.
We agree it was wrong, but why was it wrong?
Nick, it was wrong. What Lee
but why was
said,
it wrong?
What he said was wrong. As a result of what he said, the whip was removed from him. That was robust action.
No,
that was
why
robust
was it
action
wrong?
that was
That's what
taken.
I'm trying to get at.
It was wrong, Nick, because of what he said.
OK, in case you haven't worked it out, it was the second clip that was actually a real minister on the radio this morning.
And the question we're asking today is, when the government keeps saying Lee Anderson was wrong, are they really saying he might be right? Are they really leaning into this in case there are votes out there for what Lee Anderson represents? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And Guacamole Goodall is still not here. He's still in Mexico.
Spinning around
With his sombrero
clicking
on.
his fingers on a tabletop.
Yeah. And also, just can we mark your card? On Global Player, there is a special edition of the Newsagents, a question and answer session. Your questions are feeble attempts at answers, and you can download Global Player for free from the App Store or head to globalplayer.com.
That's an exclusive episode of the Newsagents answering your questions, snappy title, only on Global Player. And today we're going to try and understand why the Conservative government is finding this so complicated and so hard to give satisfactory answers to something that seems to most people fairly easy to call out. And we're going to delve into that a bit deeper. But one of the people who was actually on air trying to give his own condemnation of Lee Anderson's comments was the former London minister, Paul Scully. And ironically, or maybe inevitably, he seemed to walk into a very similar place as Lee Anderson by talking about parts of the UK, Tower Hamlets and Birmingham, with no-go areas. Tower Hamlets, we should say, has got the highest Muslim population of anywhere in the UK. So why was he doing that?
Yeah, I mean, he was speaking on BBC London, and he was trying to walk in a moderate direction to calm the debate down. And yet that phrase, no-go areas, it kind of hints of kind of Londonistan, the idea that the sort of Muslims have taken over bits of the capital, was what came out through the radio. This is him on BBC London yesterday.
If you look at parts of Tower Hamlets, for example, where there are no-go areas, parts of Birmingham, Sparkhill, but where there are no-go areas, mainly because of doctrine and mainly because of people sort of they're abusing in many ways their religion to because it's not the doctrine of Islam to espouse what some of these people are saying. That, I think, is the concern that needs to be.
Well, Paul Scully is with us now. He's giving us his first extended broadcast interview since he made those remarks.
Thank you very much for being with us. Your comments have attracted criticism, outrage. A minister has gone on the TV this morning and said you ought to withdraw those comments and apologise for them. Are you?
Let me say what I was just saying a little bit earlier. I think I do regret the use of the word no-go areas, because I think that's actually has other connotations that I hadn't really taken on board. And I'm slightly furious with myself, the fact that actually that's allowed my message to be misconstrued. And what I was trying to say was that the kind of comments that we've heard from Lee Anderson and others in recent days and weeks is the populist approach sometimes is fueled by conversations that people have and perceptions that people have in cities around the UK. I mentioned Tower Hamlets and Birmingham, where very small groups of people really misuse and abuse their doctrine in terms of Islamic gangs, but it can be black gangs, white gangs, etc. And then people write off a whole community because of the actions of a mindless and slightly threatening small group of people. And so it's areas that people feel uncomfortable in on occasion. But that's different from a no-go area in terms of the wider context. So for that, I do apologise.
No-go area. Londonistan, all the rest of it.
That I really hate, and that's what I'm really frustrated. I'm so frustrated.
But no-go area is it's not a kind of casual slip of the tongue, is it?
No, absolutely. Look, genuinely, it has nothing to do with any conspiracy theory. I'm slightly mortified and furious, frankly, that for anybody that's known me for the last 10, 15 years and the work I've done around in London, not least in Tower Hamlets with British Bangladeshis, to lump me in as someone did with Katie Hopkins and other people, and something called the Great Replacement Theory, which until yesterday I'd never heard of. What I meant by no-go areas, people avoiding those areas, because of that uncomfortable area. No. Although,
would you go to Tower Hamlets?
Actually, look, the one in Birmingham, funnily enough, that I talked about, I said Sparkhill, I actually meant Small Heath, which is next door, was a personal example. I was in a car with in an evening going through Small Heath. I think we needed a cash point or nipping into a shop one evening. I was told by my British Bangladeshi friend, don't get out of the car. It's not going to be safe for you. I will get out and get the money. And that in itself, was something that didn't make me feel particularly comfortable in that area. So it wasn't just a random part of Birmingham that I cited. It was a personal example, albeit a few years ago.
So do you feel like that about Tower Hamlets, Paul?
No, I've not had that experience. I've never had that experience. I was, I've been there day and night.
Why would you choose Tower Hamlets?
Because Tower Hamlets is, again, there was a specific example, not personal example, but again, if you remember a few years ago when you had some Muslim patrols, you had some of these guys that were going around calling people out for supposedly un-Islamic behaviour. These are the small groups of people that I'm talking about that give rise to those perceptions that are writing off an entire community.
Is it because it's the largest Muslim community? I mean, is that why you're saying?
Well, the Muslim patrols that I was talking about were specific to that area, so that was why it came. This is something that I spoke at in a wider interview. So those are the two examples.
But it is funny. I mean, Tower Hamlets has got Canary Wharf and Spitalfields and Elizabeth Dock, and you don't mean any of those areas,
I didn't. Well, I didn't. I'm not writing off the whole borough, and that's the frustrating
thing. But you did, I
thing.
guess, right? By saying Tower Hamlets, no-go areas of Tower Hamlets.
No, I didn't say no-go area of Tower Hamlets. I said of parts of Tower Hamlets. I think that's the key thing, and that was specifically in my mind at the time was talking about these Muslim patrols, which ultimately, if you remember this, and I say this was about 2013, 14, I think the headlines that were going around at that time that were citing using those examples. There was a convert who's since to Islam who's since seen the error of his ways, and is behaves in a totally different manner now. The coverage that was there really did set people off.
But you were Minister for London,
Islamic
and that was
community.
10 years ago. I mean, I guess the question is, if you think that's a scary thing for people in London to have to deal with.
I'm saying that the headlines around it actually are fueling the conversation. That's what I'm particularly saying. There are areas, clearly, as I say, and I don't want to. I was trying to talk about people feel uncomfortable. That's why I was talking about black gangs, white gangs, and whatever. Because actually, that was a gang mentality. I believe those Muslim
so you're talking about gangs.
Was a gang mentality. But
so you could have just said gangs, right?
But there was specifically in that example, they were specifically using Islamic doctrine, abusing Islamic in that particular example.
And when
the
you
example,
and the word patrols as well has a certain connotation that, like, they had taken over from the police. This was their turf. No one else was going to come on it. I mean, is that the stuff of fiction, or is that the stuff of fact?
Well, that's the coverage that was there at the time. I've googled it since making the to go back in and looking at some of those coverages. I think they
so you're calling out the coverage of it, or you're calling out what was happening? Because that's very different, isn't it? Are you saying that the headlines were sensationalist? Or are you saying that is what happened?
What I'm saying, well, actually, I think the fact that the guy repented, he's talked about the fact that he doesn't like the behaviour that he was doing at that time. You'll be able to Google the guy that I'm talking about. So he has clearly changed his behaviour. So that was going on at the time. But what I'm talking about, the reason that you can have people espousing the kind of comments that we've heard over the last day is because some people. There is an audience for a populist approach, and so what we shouldn't have is moderate voices, and I'd like to consider myself as a moderate voice, to be excluded from the conversation. But frankly, the way things have gone over the last 24 hours, not only, I talked about the fact that I regret using those choice of words, which have understandably triggered a number of people. It's added to the politics of it as well. There's an element of politics there as well. Frankly, the way I feel at the moment, I might as well just back out and not be part of that conversation. And if I'm then another moderate voice that's lost to what I hope is a nuanced debate, and your vehicle here actually is a nuanced debate, then that just leaves the vacuum.
But just explain, Paul, just take us back. Are you saying that Lee Anderson should be allowed to explore what he was saying and to say those things out loud? Because if you don't encourage people to say those things out loud, then you lose whole areas of nuanced debate. Or are you saying, I don't quite understand.
I don't think he should be able to explore that. I'm saying why he has given airtime to say that is because there are not enough moderate voices talking about people's perceptions and concerns. So actually, I was doing the interview to call Lee out. And why was I saying that? There were three things he said that I noted. First of all, he said that the UK, he didn't believe that the UK was under the control of Islamists. Well, he's correct in that. He then went on to say, but London is under control of Islamists, and that is totally untrue. Whereas there are Islamists again, small groups of people who may be agitating within protests and other areas. That's not majority of any community, frankly. So he's totally wrong in that. But the third thing he said, which really then tipped it over the Rubicon, if you like, is when he talked about Sadiq Khan giving London over to his mates. And there's loads and loads of things. I've got a whole shopping list of things that I can have a go at Sadiq Khan about. But having Islamist mates and handing over London to him isn't. So it's that kind of extreme language which is destructive. It's not helpful in any way. It's destructive.
So why can't your party leader or cabinet ministers, who we've heard a lot of over the past 2 or 3 days, come out and call it out for what it was? And they say it's wrong, and then you say, well, what was wrong? And they won't tell you.
Look, I think this part of the issue that you find in these kind of debates around politics in general. I was going out on a limb as only a handful of people did in calling Lee Anderson out because he was one of my colleagues, and until he's lost the whip, and so we don't like what we call blue on blue. It becomes a thing. So actually, nothing ever gets solved because there's always loyalty.
But what were you calling him out? What were you calling him out for? You weren't saying it was
the three things. The three
but
things
were
I
you
just
calling
said how
it
destructive it
racist?
was.
Were you calling it Islamophobic?
I'm not look, I don't like the term Islamophobic, and I think there's just wider issues with that term because of
the anti-Muslim hate.
Clearly, though, it was pretty anti. I think it was anti-Muslim because I talked about being destructive in those communities, and that therefore I think is the definition.
So why can't Rishi Sunak say that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you talking about part of the problem with the debate in this whole area is that politicians tend to back out of this of actually having some sort of challenge, a nuanced challenge, a moderate challenge.
But you are making an argument saying that we've got to have more nuance in this debate. If Rishi Sunak is not prepared to call that out for what you describe it as anti-Islam hate, then Lee Anderson is winning the argument because the Tory party looks scared to engage in it.
I think it works both ways. It's a failure of current Parliament and politics in general, because if you have if Rishi calls it out, you then get Keir Starmer piling in. You look at last week when Keir Starmer was trying to deflect some of the attention from his MPs, you then get our lot piling in. It's basically a balance between the accusations of us as Conservatives being an Islamophobic, systemic Islamophobic party, which I don't believe, and the Labour Party remaining being a systemic anti-Semitic party, which again I don't believe. So
isn't it simpler than that? Which is that I think one newspaper called it tactical racism, which is this idea that actually you bend towards certain phrases. You bend towards phrases like the Islamists are in control, or, dare I say, no-go areas, because you actually think, as a party, that you are bringing in voters by saying those things.
Well, I say again what I said about no-go. I can understand that, and that may be the case in some politicians' minds. I mean, no-go areas. To be fair, it was something that I said. I didn't even think about it to encourage votes to have dog whistle or something like that. I was trying to argue the exact opposite. I was trying to example the fact that we have a failing in our public discourse, and that we're giving voice to extreme language. So, as I say, I apologise for that. That certainly wasn't a dog whistle in my mind.
So, do you think this exploration of language is useful? Because Rishi Sunak said very clearly yesterday, words matter, and then he's unable to use the words that a lot of people want to hear him use, whether it's anti-Muslim hate or whether it's Islamophobic or whether it's racism. Do you think that by trying to define what the problem is, we are making people engage more with a real problem in this country, or do you think we are scaring people away and they're just having conversations in their own pubs and homes instead of trying to explain what their fears are?
Yeah, look, I think we are, as far as I understand, as a government, looking at a definition around anti-Muslim hatred, etc. So we can address that full on. I think we do tend to be sometimes too ginger around this debates, which then does allow people.
What does ginger mean?
Well, just tiptoeing around areas that I've fallen into a trap because I think one of the things that I do in media is I try and ask the question.
Well, what do you wish you'd said? You didn't want to say no-go areas. What do you wish you'd said?
An area in which people feel uncomfortable because of a very tiny number of people, which then lights off a bigger community. Because of that. So, my understanding of some concern about the way some people use no-go areas is they don't want to walk into a black area, a Muslim area, all these kind of things. So, it's just literally the colour of the skin or the religion that's writing off an entire community. That was not what I was trying to get across. And, for that, I'm very sorry. But we've just got to be careful about our language, which is ironic that I'm now here apologising.
No, but I do think it's very interesting that you've said, look, I got this wrong. And you've explained what you've got wrong. The Conservative Party, on high, says he's got something wrong, but we're not going to tell you what he's got wrong.
And Lee Anderson doesn't think he's got anything wrong. And thinks that apologising is weakness.
Which it's not. But of course, the problem in politics, sorry, does seem to be the hardest word, and that's partly. I've done so many media interviews when, as minister, I've had to hold a government line. Now I'm speaking. This is very much me speaking, sometimes if you say sorry, that's jumped on by opponents, and the longer that you don't say sorry, the harder it is then to say.
I just want to play you this clip of Michael Tomlinson, the immigration minister, this morning with Nick Ferrari, and I want to get your views on the other side of it.
I think what Lee said was wrong, and as a result of what he said, he had the whip removed from him. That's robust
what was it
action.
Specifically that meant the whip had to go? We agree it was wrong, but why was it wrong?
Nick, it was wrong. What Lee
but why was
said,
it wrong?
What he said was wrong. As a result of what he said, the whip was removed from him. That was robust action.
No,
that was
why
robust
was it
action
wrong?
that was
That's
taken.
what I'm trying to get at.
It was wrong, Nick, because of what he said, and robust action was taken as a result.
You're well-educated. Let's try this a different way. Was it Islamophobic?
What he said was wrong, and robust action was taken, and the whip was removed within 24 hours.
Minister, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
Minister, I'm going to, and I'm normally a very polite man, I'm actually going to effectively put the fact, I'll ask you now for the third time, I've asked you 6 times why it was necessary. For the third time, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
I'll have to curtail the interview there. I'm grateful for your time, but enough already. Michael Tomlinson is the Minister of State for Illegal...
That sounded like a word salad.
Yeah, look, Michael is a very thoughtful guy and is a good mate. So it's hard to listen to that. Nick is a ferocious interviewer, and I've got on the hook with him once about something totally different. But nonetheless, I think you should be able to call it out for Lee's words for what it is. And as I say, it's stoking up division. It's attacking Sadiq Khan on a political basis purely, but predominantly because of his faith. And so that in itself is
Paul,
totally destructive.
That
That's what he should have said.
The reason the memo is going round saying don't call it Islamophobic is because the leader of your party thinks there might be lots of voters who actually will come towards the Conservative Party if they don't call it out. If they go, well, it was wrong, but it wasn't Islamophobic.
Well, I talked about the term Islamophobia, but even if you call it anti-Muslim hatred or whatever you want to call it, I think you can't just say it was wrong. I mean, that's just not an answer.
So why are they doing it?
I don't know is the honest answer. I'm not sure that, frankly, that will draw a whole
because they're scared of losing votes to reform.
I don't think it's actually going to get any votes because actually, if we are just sitting here, not looking particularly competent on answering some pretty fundamental questions, that in itself is going to drain a whole load of votes, and understandably so.
Just on that, the Conservative Party is in a very vulnerable position. It clearly wants to shut this story down. And it just keeps, by not answering the question, it makes it worse, doesn't it? Yeah,
and this is what I was talking about earlier. If you don't shut things down and answer questions as directly as possible, it becomes harder and harder to then change your position or add the nuance to your position. This is one of the reasons, actually, I'm grateful for you for giving me the opportunity to speak about what I said and how it was misconstrued. A lot of it because of my choice of language.
What do you think this is doing to your party now?
It's putting us or keeping us, should I say, in a really difficult, horrible place. It's because what we should be doing as any political leaders, whether we're in government, opposition, as parliamentarians, we should be bringing communities together, not dividing them. I hate the politics of division, and we need to just pull together, but. Understanding that there is this tribal politics around us, how do we reach out and find some sort of consensus that doesn't divide communities? We can do politics in a different way.
Paul Scully, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
In the interview there, you made reference to a comment that was in one of the newspapers this morning about tactical racism. And I read that column as well. I thought it was fascinating as well, the idea that, is this accidental or is this deliberate? Or is this, are the Conservative Party leaning into the idea that there are an awful lot of people who are very perturbed by what they've seen on the streets with these pro-Palestinian protests and are conflating that with Islamists taking control of the streets of our capital? And therefore, maybe we can tap into this. We're 20 points behind in the polls. Can we get some of that on side?
I think one of the problems that Rishi Sunak has is that because he wasn't elected, he doesn't actually know who he represents or what he stands for. He isn't Boris Johnson. He can't point to the red wall seats and say, I won those and that's amazing, that was a landslide, or I won the Surrey Tory seats in the Shires. He literally doesn't know. And so what you see in some of this language is a Prime Minister who's sending his ministers out onto the air ill-equipped with the actual language that they need to use because they're scared of their own shadow. And I think Rishi Sunak right now doesn't know, are the red wall seats full of people who genuinely agree with Lee Anderson and might be actually quite racist in their beliefs, in which case he doesn't want to lose them by losing Lee, he doesn't want to see them go to reform, or is he completely wrong about that? Did the red wall seats literally vote Conservative because they were sick of the Brexit noise and they had other things to think about and they, wanted to get on with jobs and cost of living and the economy and health and all the rest of it? And he's conflating two things, which is there's a load of Lee Andersons, right across the north of England. He doesn't know, right? He's quite scared of that part of the world. That's not his zone. I mean, yes, he's a North York's Richmond MP, but he doesn't know that part of the world. And so I think what you get is somebody who is slightly terrified of an electorate that he doesn't even know.
I think that what's interesting about that is that speaks to him not being a great politician. Actually, the thing I would say about Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, which I covered for many years, they were great instinctive politicians of knowing where the mood of the country was. You know, Donald Trump, build a wall, all the rest of it. That worked really well for him. Boris Johnson, get Brexit done, oven-ready deal. People were sick of it. That worked really well for him. I think you've got a Conservative Party at the moment that doesn't really know where the heartbeat of the nation is. Is it in Surrey or is it in Nottinghamshire? And can we attract both simultaneously, or isn't there a danger that if we go out to the right to try and thwart reform, then we're going to lose moderate opinion as well? And I just don't think that you know, you said scared of your own shadow. I think it's like there's a confidence crisis about what the Conservative Party stands for now. That a lot of emotion has been whipped up. We saw it over Brexit. We're seeing it now over the migrant crisis, and we're seeing it since October the 7th. And the Conservative Party just doesn't feel confident about where to place itself.
Yeah, and I think they can see the 20-point poll gap between the Conservatives and Labour, but what they don't yet understand is how real the threat from reform is. And we had those 2 by-elections last week before, where reform were coming in on 13% of the vote and 10% of the vote. Now, Reform is a party made to do well in by-elections, you could say. You know, that's what we saw with sort of UKIP, and that's what we saw when it's not a general election. It's somewhere where they can be very targeted, very specific, and get their candidate well known around the constituency. Richard Tice is being quite tight-lipped about just who has called him, just who he's talking to in terms of Conservative MPs, says he doesn't want to give a running commentary, then comes on the airwaves every day to give a running commentary. And what we don't yet know is the force of weight that Reform has over the Conservative Party, maybe over parts of Labour as well. But Rishi Sunak is acting like a man who can see what he's lost to Labour, or can see what he's about to lose to Labour, but doesn't yet know if he can save Reform from pushing the Tories into an even worse place. I mean, the Reform dream now, you know, if you want to step back, is not, oh, we're going to reshape the Conservative Party and make it more to the right. Reform want to replace the Conservative Party. They think if there's going to be a wipeout the next election, then they might rerun the electoral running order. Right? Now, I'm not saying that. I don't think we are anywhere near the territory of Reform taking whole seats at all at the general election. Not yet. But I think that is somewhere in Sunak's mind what he's terrified of.
I think the terror and what Rishi Sunak is trying, walking this desperate tightrope where he's tilting precariously on one side and then vertiginously on the other side and just saying, oh, I've got to somehow stay on this rope, is exactly that the possibility is there that even if Reform doesn't replace the Conservative Party has to move so far towards Reform that it effectively becomes the Reform Party. And these are seismic events that are taking place in our politics at the moment. What I find extraordinary, sitting here now, is to think that by the end of this week, in the House of Commons, there could be a far-left, populist, divisive figure in the shape of George Galloway, who was fired for anti-Semitism in a previous job. And on the other side, you could have the first Reform MP in the Commons, in the shape of Lee Anderson, following the whip being suspended from him for his Islamophobic views. I'd have never seen that coming 2 months ago.
I think that's the direction of travel that we've been going in for quite a while, don't you?
Well, I think that to have some of those extremes represented within the House of Commons, I'd have said it was pretty far-fetched. But now it looks perfectly possible that that will be the case.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.